I was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my wedding vest, feeling this overwhelming wave of happiness wash over me. Marlena had picked out this charcoal gray color, said it brought out my eyes. After everything we had been through together, this moment felt like a dream finally coming true. Then my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw a number I had not seen in 7 years. My mother. 7 years ago, my sister Hildegard told a lie that destroyed my life. Now they want back in. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me. To understand why I hesitated to answer that call, we need to go back to the summer I turned 18. I grew up in a modest 2-story house in the suburbs of Ohio. We had a decent-sized backyard where my father used to barbecue on Sundays, and a front porch where my mother would sit in the evenings reading her romance novels. From the outside, we looked like any normal American family, but inside those walls, there was always an invisible divide. My father, Ronald, worked as a plumber for over 25 years. He was a man of few words, the kind who believed actions spoke louder than anything you could say. He worked hard, came home tired, and expected respect without having to ask for it. My mother, Darlene, split her time between raising us and working part-time at a local bakery. She made the best apple pie in the neighborhood, and she always tried to keep the peace in our home, even when peace seemed impossible to find. Then there was my sister Hildegard. She was 3 years older than me, and from the day I was born, it felt like I was competing for something I could never win. Hildegard was the firstborn, the one who could do no wrong. When she brought home good grades, my parents threw small celebrations. When I earned a sports scholarship for basketball, my father just nodded from behind his newspaper and went back to reading. I learned early on that in our house, there were 2 different sets of rules. I remember this one time when I was about 12 years old. My grandmother had given my mother this beautiful antique vase, a family heirloom, that sat on the living room shelf. One afternoon, Hildegard was showing off for some friends dancing around the living room, and she knocked that vase right off its stand. It shattered into 100 pieces on the hardwood floor. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I heard the crash. By the time my mother came running in, Hildegard was already crying, pointing at me, saying I had thrown a ball inside the house. I tried to explain that I had been nowhere near that vase, that I had not even been in the room. But Hildegard's tears were more convincing than my words. I was punished for 2 weeks and missed the class field trip to the Science Museum, a trip I had been looking forward to for months. That night, I saw Hildegard smirk at me from across the dinner table when our parents were not looking. That was the first time I understood what kind of person my sister really was. But even after incidents like that, I kept hoping things would change. I told myself that when we both grew up, when we became adults, Hildegard would mature. We would laugh about our childhood rivalries and become close like siblings should be. I held on to that hope for years. The summer I turned 18 was supposed to be the beginning of everything good. I had just graduated high school, and I had earned a basketball scholarship to a state university. It was not a full ride, so I would still need some financial help from my parents for housing and books. But it was a chance at a future I had built with my own hands. I was proud of myself, even if my father never said he was proud of me. Hildegard was 21 that summer, and she was dating a guy named Derek. Derek came from money, serious money. His father owned a chain of hardware stores across the region and had recently become a business partner with my father on a small plumbing contract. This connection made Derek practically untouchable in my parents' eyes. He was tall, charming, always knew the right things to say. Hildegard paraded him around like he was some kind of trophy, and my parents treated him like the son they wished they had. One evening, Derek came over for dinner. My mother made her famous pot roast, and my father actually wore a button-down shirt instead of his usual work clothes. The whole house felt different when Derek was around, like everyone was performing for an audience. I mostly stayed quiet answering questions when asked, but otherwise just observing. After dinner, everyone moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. At some point, Derek excused himself to use the restroom, and he left his phone on the coffee table. It buzzed a few times, and I happened to glance over at the screen. I was not trying to snoop, but the messages were right there, lighting up for anyone to see. The texts were from someone named Amber, and they were not casual. Heart emojis, plans to meet up at some hotel, the following weekend messages that made it crystal clear Derek was seeing someone else behind my sister's back. My stomach turned. Whatever I thought about Hildegard, she was still my sister. She did not deserve to be played like that. I wrestled with what to do for the next 2 days. Part of me wanted to stay out of it to let Hildegard figure it out on her own. But another part of me, maybe the part that still believed families should look out for each other, decided she deserved to know the truth. So I waited until our parents went out one afternoon and I sat Hildegard down in her room. I told her everything. I described the messages, the name, the plans. I spoke calmly without accusation, just laying out the facts. I expected her to be upset, maybe even grateful that I cared enough to tell her. Instead, Hildegard's face went pale, then red, and then something shifted behind her eyes. She stood up slowly and told me I was lying. She said I was jealous of her happiness, that I had always been jealous, and that I needed to get out of her room before she said something she would regret. I left confused and hurt, but I told myself she was just in shock. She would process the information and eventually thank me. I could not have been more wrong. 2 days later, my parents called me into the living room. The atmosphere was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. My father sat in his armchair with his jaw clenched tight, and my mother was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Hildegard sat on the couch, sobbing into her hands. Before I could ask what was going on, my father spoke. His voice was cold, controlled, and filled with a disappointment I had never heard before. He asked me how I could do something so disgusting. He asked me if I had any shame at all. I had no idea what he was talking about. Then Hildegard lifted her head and, through her tears, accused me of trying to steal Derek from her. She said I had been sending him flirtatious messages for weeks, that I had tried to kiss him at the neighbor's birthday party the weekend before. She said Derek had shown her the proof screenshots of messages I had supposedly sent. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. I tried to speak to defend myself, but my voice came out shaky and weak. I told them it was all lies, that I had never sent any messages, that I had never touched Derek. I begged them to believe me. But my father slammed his fist on the arm of his chair and told me to stop lying. My mother just cried harder. Hildegard looked at me with this expression of wounded betrayal that was so convincing, so perfectly performed. She had clearly rehearsed this moment. My father gave me an ultimatum. Either I admit what I did and apologize to Hildegard, or I pack my things and leave. He said he would not have someone with no morals living under his roof. I looked at my mother, hoping she would step in, hoping she would see the truth in my eyes. But she just shook her head and looked away. I refused to confess to something I did not do. I refused to give Hildegard that satisfaction. So my father told me I had 24 hours to get out. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how everything had fallen apart so quickly. My scholarship required parental financial support for the portion not covered by the award. Without my family, that dream was gone. Everything I had worked for destroyed by a lie. My mother never came to my room to say goodbye, but Hildegard did. She walked past my door around midnight, and through the crack, I saw her smile. It was a small, satisfied smile, the smile of someone who had won. I found out the truth much later, piecing it together from mutual acquaintances and a few honest conversations years down the line. When I told Hildegard about Derek's cheating, she had confronted him. But Derek was smooth and he knew how to manipulate. Instead of admitting the affair, he turned everything around. He told Hildegard that I was the problem, that I had been pursuing him, that he had proof. He fabricated messages, created a whole false narrative, and Hildegard chose to believe him because believing me meant losing the rich boyfriend she had worked so hard to secure. The worst part was that Hildegard knew. Deep down, she knew Derek was lying. But she made a calculated decision to sacrifice her own brother, rather than face the truth about the man she was dating. She let me be thrown out onto the street to protect a relationship built on lies. That was not confusion or misunderstanding. That was betrayal of the coldest kind. I left home the next morning with a backpack, $200 in savings, and no idea where I was going. I took a bus to Columbus because it was the biggest city nearby, and I figured I could disappear there. Those first few nights, I slept at the bus station, curled up on plastic chairs, trying to look like I was just waiting for a ride. I found a job washing dishes at a small diner called Corner Spot within the first week. The pay was barely minimum wage, but it was something. The owner was a 60-year-old man named Hank, a Vietnam veteran with a gruff exterior and a heart bigger than he would ever admit. He noticed I was wearing the same clothes every day, noticed I never talked about family or home. One evening after closing, he asked me straight out if I had a place to sleep. I could have lied, but I was too tired for lies. I told him no. Hank nodded slowly, then offered me the storage room in the back of the diner. It was barely bigger than a closet, but it had a cot, a small heater, and a lock on the door. He charged me $50 a month, which was nothing, and told me I could eat whatever leftovers we had at the end of each shift. That storage room became my home for the next 2 years. I worked doubles whenever I could, saving every penny that did not go toward absolute necessities. At night, I studied online, working toward certifications in business and management. The library down the street had free internet, and I spent countless hours there after my shifts ended. I will not pretend those years were not hard. There were nights I cried myself to sleep. Nights I wondered if my parents ever thought about me. Nights I questioned if maybe I should have just lied and apologized to Hildegard just to keep my family. But every time that thought crossed my mind, I remembered her smile in the hallway. I remembered that she knew the truth and did not care. And I would remind myself that some prices are too high to pay even for family. Slowly, things started to change. Hank began trusting me with more responsibility. By the time I was 20, I was managing the morning shifts. By 22, I was essentially running the place while Hank dealt with his growing health issues. The diner was not fancy, but it was honest work, and I took pride in it. I enrolled in community college part-time, taking night classes in accounting and business administration. It was there in an intermediate accounting course that I met Marlena. She was sitting 2 rows ahead of me, her dark curly hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was Puerto Rican, born and raised in Ohio, just like me, working full-time at an insurance company while chasing her own dreams. We started talking after class one day when we were both struggling with the same homework problem. That conversation led to coffee, which led to study sessions, which led to something more. Marlena was the first person I told about my past, the whole ugly truth about Hildegard and Derek and being thrown away by my own family. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she did not offer pity or empty reassurances. She just took my hand and said that their blindness was not my burden to carry. She said the family I came from did not define the family I could create. I fell in love with her somewhere between that moment and our 3rd cup of coffee. When I was 26, Hank decided to retire. His knees were giving out, his doctor was worried about his heart, and he said he had earned some peace. He offered to sell me the diner at a price so low it was practically a gift. I took out a small business loan, emptied my savings, and signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I renamed the place Second Chance Diner. It felt right, like I was honoring my own story while creating something new. We kept Hank's recipes, but updated the decor, expanded the menu, started a weekend brunch service that became popular with the local crowd. Within 3 years, the business had grown enough that I opened a second location across town. Marlena and I moved in together, then got engaged on Christmas Eve last year. I proposed in our small apartment with a ring I had saved up for over 8 months. She cried, I cried, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. The news of our engagement apparently traveled through old channels. A friend from high school who still lived near my parents mentioned seeing the announcement on social media. Word got back to my family, and suddenly, after 7 years of silence, they wanted back into my life. It started with my mother. Missed calls at first, then voicemails asking me to please call back, saying she had so much to tell me. Then came the long text messages, paragraphs about how much they missed me, how the house felt empty, how she thought about me every single day. I did not respond. My father wrote me a letter, an actual handwritten letter, something he had never done in my entire life. He talked about regret, about how he had failed as a father, about how he wanted to walk me down the aisle. Or at least be there to see me start this new chapter. The letter was 3 pages long. I read it once and put it in a drawer. Hildegard reached out too eventually. Her message was shorter, less emotional. She wrote that the past was the past, that holding grudges only hurt everyone, that we should let bygones be bygones. She never once used the word sorry. She never acknowledged what she did. She just expected me to move on as if 7 years of silence and betrayal could be erased with a single text. I learned through the grapevine that Hildegard and Derek broke up about 2 years after I left. Apparently, his pattern of cheating caught up with him, and even Hildegard could not ignore it anymore. She was 30 now, single, working some dead-end office job. I did not feel satisfaction hearing that. I did not feel much of anything. After weeks of messages, I finally agreed to meet them. Not because I had forgiven them, but because I needed to look them in the eyes and say what I had carried for 7 years. We met at a coffee shop on neutral ground. Marlena came with me, her hand in mine under the table. My mother looked older, the lines on her face deeper than I remembered. She started crying the moment she saw me reaching out like she wanted to hug me, but unsure if she was allowed. My father seemed smaller. Somehow, his hair almost completely gray, now his shoulders hunched in a way I had never seen. And Hildegard sat at the end of the table, avoiding my gaze, fidgeting with her coffee cup. My mother spoke first, apologizing over and over, saying she should have listened, should have believed me. My father cleared his throat and said he let his pride blind him, that not a day went by when he did not regret what happened. Their words washed over me, sincere maybe, but late. So very late. Then I turned to Hildegard and asked her directly if she had something to say. She stumbled over her words, finally admitting that she had known that Derek had lied, that she had been too scared of losing him to stand up for me. But even then, even in that confession, there was no real apology, just explanations, justifications, reasons why she did what she did. I sat there in silence for a long moment, letting everything settle. Then I spoke. I told them I did not hate them anymore. Hate takes too much energy, too much of your soul. I had spent years working through my anger, and I had come out the other side, not because of them, but in spite of them. I told them I forgave them truly because forgiveness was about freeing myself, not about giving them permission. But I also told them that forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. It did not mean pretending the last 7 years never happened. It did not mean they got a seat at my wedding just because blood connected us. I explained that Hank would be walking me down the aisle. Hank, who gave me a place to sleep when I had nothing. Hank, who believed in me when my own parents did not. He was the father I found when I needed one most, and he had earned that honor. I told my family that maybe someday we could rebuild something. But it would take time, real time, not just a few tearful conversations. And it would take honesty, genuine honesty, not just Hildegard saying we should forget the past. It would take her actually owning what she did and understanding the weight of it. My mother nodded through her tears. My father looked down at the table. Hildegard said nothing at all. The wedding was in October when the leaves were turning gold and red and the air had that crisp autumn bite. Hank walked me down the aisle in his best suit, the one he had not worn since his own wife's funeral 15 years ago. Marlena looked like a vision in her white dress, and when I saw her waiting for me at the altar, every hard year, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, it all felt worth it. I had chosen the people in that room carefully. Friends from the diner, colleagues from my business courses, Marlena's big loving family who had accepted me as one of their own. These were the people who showed up when it mattered, who built me up instead of tearing me down. As we exchanged vows, I glanced toward the window. Outside, parked at the far end of the lot, I saw my father's old truck. He had come after all, even though he was not invited inside. Part of me wanted to be angry, but I found I was not. He was there in his own way. Maybe that was all he could offer right now. Maybe someday it would be more. I did not wave or acknowledge him. I turned back to Marlena, said my vows, and meant every word. Here is what I have learned through all of this. Family is not just about blood. Family is about who stands beside you when standing is hard. It is about who believes in you when the world tells you that you are worthless. It is about who gives you a cot in a storage room or holds your hand in a coffee shop when you face the ghosts of your past. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. It does not mean you have to let people back into your life. It does not mean you have to pretend everything is okay. It means you stop letting their actions poison your present and your future. And boundaries. Boundaries are how you protect the life you have built. They are not walls of anger. They are fences of wisdom, and there is nothing wrong with deciding who gets to come through the gate. If you are watching this and you have been betrayed by someone who should have protected you, I want you to know that your pain is valid, but I also want you to know that your story does not end with their betrayal. You get to write the next chapter. You get to decide who matters. And you get to find your own version of a second chance. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family, even when it was painful? What helped you find peace? Share your story in the comments below. If this video touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for spending this time with me. Whatever you are going through, I hope you find your own second chance, your own people who see your worth, your own moment of peace. Take care of yourself. You deserve it.